Hey FFR listeners, did you know that if you join our Patreon community, you can get nifty perks like early access, exclusive weekly bonus segments, access to our friendly Discord, and more? That's right, you can get cool stuff and help us keep doing FFR at the same time. What are you waiting for? Go to patreon.com/femfreak.
Somehow, the racial demographics of this fantasy world just happen to mirror all of the media that we see.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by two people who only wish they had more coins to toss to their witchers. Carolyn Pettit.
Toss a coin to your witcher, O Valley of Plenty, O Valley of Plenty.
I don't have a follow-up to that.
It should be noted that Ebony is lip-syncing along to that, and I just awkwardly stared at her the whole time.
We could do Witcher karaoke. Yo, did I just come up with $1 million idea?
You sure
Nobody
did.
steal that.
And that would be Ebony Adams. This week, we'll be venturing into the harsh world of the new Netflix series, The Witcher, with the glummest tour guide of them all, Henry Cavill. Fuck.
Fuck.
Fuck. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Anita.
Hey!
How's everyone doing today? Wow.
Fantastic.
Well, that's
Thrilled.
very opposite.
Thrilled to be recording this episode for a second time.
What?
Cannot
Don't
wait to talk
tell
about
them.
The Witcher.
don't tell them how the podcasts are made.
Yeah, you know, it happens every once in a great while, but we are recording this episode for the second time because
both Carolyn and I fucked up.
And
Basically.
spoiler alert, all of your favorite podcasts have been re-recorded at some point. This happens to absolutely everybody.
It really does. I feel like all I do is record podcasts right now because I already recorded one today and I'm recording one tomorrow and we recorded one yesterday. And I feel like I might just become a podcast. Can a human become a podcast?
That's
like the modern version of Max Headroom or something.
Oh God.
Yeah, I was thinking
happening.
Tron. I was thinking Tron, but I think similar. So Ebony and I were thinking along similar lines there, like a human, entering, just becoming one with podcasts. Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah. Great. That's going to be me.
I look forward to your new life.
Thanks, Ebony.
On the interwebs, neuromancer.
She's staring very
modernism.
aggressively into my eyes, trying to come up with something funny to say.
Listeners, FemFreak radio heads, I just took some pain medication, so things are going to get real loopy by the end of this show.
Hi, Ebony.
Hi,
Also,
Ebony is right.
Yeah. Oh, hey-oh. Fun fact about Carolyn's apartment. So I live in a really old apartment with a really old kind of heating system. So if anyone hears some loud clanging noises in the background, that is the pipes in my apartment struggling to produce some, measure of heat. And
so that's really not just you practicing your killer drum moves in the middle of recording this?
Exactly. Thank you, Anita.
Cool.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into this shit. I mean that with all of the meaning of the word. All right. Americans know the character of Geralt of Rivia best from CD Projekt Red's series of video games about his adventures, most notably 2015's wildly popular The Witcher 3. However, he actually originated in a series of books by Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski. And the Netflix series has the license of the books, not the games. It's a whole thing. Nobody actually cares. Anyways, still, those who have played the games will find much that's similar in Netflix's series. Henry Cavill plays Geralt, a mutant with the knowledge and abilities to deal with many a fearsome mythical creature. However, it's people who cause him the most trouble, and their recklessness and arrogance and discrimination. The show's first season uses multiple timelines that leap across decades to lay out how Geralt's destiny becomes intertwined with that of young Princess Cersei, the lion cub of Sintra.
Nope.
Siri, fuck.
We're doing so well.
Is Cersei from Game of Thrones?
Yes.
A show that I barely watched. All right.
Keep that in, Rob.
Yeah, let's just, it's fine. Cool, I'm cool. The shows are basically the same anyways. What? Should we keep this in or should we trash this?
This is
okay.
be nice.
Maybe this could be like a deleted scene at the end of the episode for people who listen through the little credit spiel.
Good call. All right. The show's first season uses multiple timelines that leap across decades to lay out how Geralt's destiny becomes intertwined with that of young Princess Ciri, the Lion Cub of Sintra, who goes on the run when her castle is overrun by the evil forces of Nilfgaard. Okay, y'all, I don't remember anything. Like, we record the podcast and it's all out of my brain, so I'm like, oh, right, that happened. Oh, right, those characters.
Well, one thing that I think is interesting about the reactions that I see from a lot of people about this series is that more than usual, I think there's a lot of people, at least on my Twitter timeline, who are reacting to the show basically with the sentiment of like, this show is a big fucking mess, but like kind of in a good way, or like it's a mess, but I still kind of like it. And normally, like when people like a lot of times people will be like, oh, this game is bad, but I like it. It's like, well, just I mean, it's okay to think that it's good. Like, why don't you just admit that you like it? But there is something like really messy about this show, and yet I think a lot of us still find something about it really, like, I don't know if appealing is the right word, but we don't just write it off for being a mess. It's sort of like we just accept in some way that it's a mess. And
I can never actually utter the words that I like this show, nor that I recommend this show, nor suggest anyone actually watch it, but it is weirdly appealing. Like,
it is compelling, like in its literal
compelling.
sense. I feel as if I've been hypnotized by this show, or I was when I was watching it, because at the same time that I was like, what the fuck is happening right now in my eyeballs? I couldn't stop watching Netflix. Are you continue watching The Witcher? Yes. Fire up another episode. I'm into it.
Yeah, I don't like, and I say that like the show for weeks after I watched it would randomly pop into my head. Like I would randomly think about the characters and what they were going through. And it was not intentional.
Which characters?
I don't know. Well, Yennefer mostly, but but like, the feeling of the show and the environment of it, for some reason, it kind of like it's like dirt on the bottom of your shoes. It's there. You can't get rid of it. That's not a good analogy at all. Anyways, I've said this before, but I tend to not like this style of fantasy. I wasn't a huge fan of Game of Thrones, for example, and it felt very much like watching that, where I was, kind of engaged a little bit, but more was watching it because everyone else was watching it and felt like I should, but then I actually legit couldn't stop watching it. So there's something about this fucking show that makes people be like, what? Like, yeah. Anyways, we are beating a dead horse. Here we go.
Yeah.
I think. Oh, sorry.
I think part of what I struggle with about this show is something that I struggle with about a lot of media, and that is that I think that fundamentally this show has sort of the perspective that, the world is just kind of like patriarchy, and like patriarchal violence is just kind of, it sucks, but it also is just like inevitable. It's just the way it is, and you can there's like a spiel early on where Geralt is like the, greater evil, lesser evil. Like there's just sort of the sense that, evil is just like, you kind of just have to accept it to some degree. And it's a similar thing to, maybe this is a weird comparison to make, but when I think about, say, the films of like Martin Scorsese, like his gangster movies or whatever, where a lot of people are like, well, it's critical of those men and their lives because they typically have some kind of fall that occurs where like their ambition, like things just don't work out for them. And I'm like, yeah, but they don't like show a way out or show anything beyond the, like the world of patriarchal violence in which those men live. It's sort of like this is kind of bad and it's unfortunate, but it's just the way it is. And I feel like there's something similar here where it just sort of reinforces this feeling of like, well, the world sucks, but what are you gonna do? And like generally speaking, from my storytelling, I like to see some sort of glimpse of like, at least a way out or like a transformative possibility. And I don't think that The Witcher is interested in that. I feel like it's very interested in like acknowledging things. There's a queen or like women in the show will sometimes, for instance, acknowledge that like, I have to do this because of male custom, or I have to do this because it's the way things are. And it's like, it sucks, but it's the way it is. And it's like, it's kind of nice on some level to have those oppressive structures and systems acknowledged, but it's also like, but I wish it went,
there's no further. Point that you think it's actually going to get challenged.
Yeah.
Really. Although I thought that it would. I think one of the characters that you are alluding to, Carol, would be the queen, whose name I'm forgetting, but the lioness of Sintra. I was fascinated by her, by how incredibly fierce she is, and the like profound kind of martial strength that she is allowed to demonstrate. And I love when we see women in armor,
yes.
and like beat up armor, and that this was not presented as something that was so far out of the realm of, like possibility or, something that was so uncommon that it was like, blasphemous or whatever that she was wearing that. But then, ultimately, I think this show is generic fantasy kind of at its smoothest and best. And by that, I mean, not generic in terms that it's, like it's banal, but that it marks all of the markers, like it hits all of the markers of the genre. So but it does it in a very modern, knowing way and a winking way. So it's like, okay, you're going to have this, this badass who's, amazing with a sword. And of course there's going to be a bard, but the bard is going to be like, the comic relief figure in a certain way that's going to be very palatable to.
So it's familiar. It's appealing in its familiarity.
Right. But it's also very aware of what genre it's in, and presenting those things to you, so as you say, like it doesn't really offer anything new. What it does offer is perhaps offer this kind of like knowing wink. Like we all know what we're doing here, right?
Yeah.
Except like in the way that I think this series, the thing that I ultimately came out of it loving was how many different kinds of horrible women were in it, which is a weird thing to love, but I think is right on brand for me. Because there's been a lot of talk in media criticism about unlikable heroines, which I think in a lot of ways is it unworkable and also like kind of, useless flattening of character in a way. But ultimately what we do have are characters like Yennefer or Tissaia. There are very few women, I should say, in this show that are completely good. They're very complex and horrible in very distinct ways. And I absolutely loved that. I loved that, the Nilfgaardians, their mage is this Black woman who's just like, oh my God, she's unstoppable. She's this, like the face of the fist of this relentless force. Like, if this show is offering us anything new, it's carving out more of a space for women who traditionally have gotten in most traditional fantasy have gotten kind of short shrift.
Yeah. Well, so let's actually get into some of the women on the show.
Let's get into it.
I think Yennefer, she's the most obvious. She's a main character. One of the major plot threads is following her. And last time we were talking about this, you addressed a really important point about disability here.
Yeah, I was fucked off with the way that Yennefer, who is this fascinating character, and she is fascinating not in spite of her disability, but through her disability, in her disability. It does not, I don't know, it's
And so her disability is physical in terms of the way she looks.
She's got like a hunch. Like a shoulder hunch, but also her face, her lip has some, I don't want to use the term deformity. I'm not sure what the correct word for this is. If you've seen the show, you know what I'm talking about. And I think, we should probably spend some time unpacking the fact that she is presented as this character who is visibly disabled. And she is also then revealed to be the product of a human and elf mating, So like the notion of, pure blood and impure blood and mixed parentage, it can get a little bit dicey.
So it gets really complicated because she magically becomes like traditionally beautiful, like through magic.
She demands it.
She has the choice to do that, and the cost of it is losing her womb. So she's unable to bear children. And so that brings up a whole complicated thing in this narrative, because when you have this complicated piece around her disability is something that she has to overcome in order to be accepted in the world, which we've discussed at length on this show about how troubling that is. But also a whole part of her story arc is her becoming aggressively and violently obsessed with having a baby after she made the fucking choice to not be able to have children. And I was bothered by that because it felt a lot like it was setting it up to be like, I just want a choice, right? So it's supposed to be this political statement about how women should choose what they can do with their bodies, et cetera, et cetera. But like, she fucking made the choice. So like, it's not fair to conflate, actual like a movements that support women's reproductive rights and or people's reproductive rights and what we want to do with our bodies, with her being like, but I did make this choice and I regret it, but so I got to live with the consequences of that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, although that was problematic, I was more dismayed by the fact that she feels as if she will not have access to like the full range of her powers unless she is considered, objectively, traditionally beautiful, right? And although it is a problem that there are dissenting voices, and those one of those dissenting voices is her lover at the time, who is this fellow magical student, and we see through his eyes, and we hear him, articulate like, he finds her beautiful. He finds her desirable before this change. You should not have to be sexually desirable to someone to accept yourself. But I do think it's important that the show lets us know that she is not considered hideous. It is something she needs to overcome. But the fact that she, after she realizes, after her decades spent, kind of wielding this useless power for these puppet kings, it's interesting and not at all surprising that she isn't like, you know what, I'm gonna go back to the way that I was before. Like there was an authenticity to who I was that I have somehow lost touch with. Like she's never going to go back to that. That is not offered to her. But the thing that she does try and reclaim is her reproductive generative ability.
And I think some of what she's seeking too is that like she hasn't been able to find authentic love and like, I think that she thinks that having a baby is going to, like, her child will authentically love her and accept her in a way that she hasn't been able to. Maybe that's some of it. I don't know. The whole thing kind of annoyed me.
And yet she was
so captivating.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, that even actor in her is very, very good.
Yeah. And also, like, I very much, like, I found her deeply annoying for the whole show until, like, the last episode. But I believe that she would go to these, like, the extremes of, like, using her sexuality in these ways that can be damaging to herself and others. Like, I believe that she would pendulum swing in that way to understand her place in the world and how she feels and, all of a sudden looking differently. And so I get that. I appreciate that part of the storyline and think it makes a lot of sense. Carolyn, I know you had a different perspective on this. Did you want to share that?
Sure. I mean, I guess what I said, yeah, I mean, obviously, like, I'm coming at this from through, seeing this through the lens of, like, my trans experience and my, like, experiences, feeling, I guess my feeling is that I recognize that a lot of Yennefer's impulses and desires are problematic, and that the way that they're tied up with disability, which is not something that I can relate to or understand, like that's a different kind of set of issues, that there are problematic elements there. And yet, I mean, but as a trans woman who, I'd say generally speaking does not have what we might call quote unquote passing privilege, and who often has felt like invisible in the world or undesirable, and who sometimes feels like, well, it is harder for me to find a relationship, to find a partner, to find love, or even just to walk into a place and feel safe or seen or whatever, because I'm so aware that I'm so visibly different, quote unquote. Like, I do feel that there is that impulse in me of like, oh God, I wish I could look different than I do. I wish so much. Like, it's like at times there has been, and particularly when I was younger, but it's not like it's completely gone away, this burning, like, why can't I just look, I mean, quote unquote, cisgender or whatever. And like, I recognize even that those impulses are loaded and problematic in and of themselves. But also, like, that's the reality of the society and the culture we live in, is that my life would be easier if I had quote unquote passing privilege. And so it's like this thing where I sort of, I value on seeing women want, like, it's like I can understand a woman wanting a thing that, yes, it's loaded, yes, it's problematic, yes, it's like it's tied up in all of this like fucked up shit, and yet, like, how can we not internalize some of that at times, given the ways in which we are treated by the world in which we live? Like, it's that kind of complicated feeling. So, it's like I recognize that there are issues, and yet I could still sort of like relate to, or on some level felt like I could understand some of those impulses. And I want to see, sometimes I want to see like messy, like unhealthy desires on screen, maybe in a way that acknowledges that they're unhealthy, but that treats them in the right way of acknowledging, like, well, like, society is fucked up, and there are oppressions and personal anguishes and things that come with these realities.
Yeah, and I think that because there are several different readings of Yennefer in this way that can have a real impact on folks, is part of why that, even though it's this weird, like, eye-rolly type of storyline, it's still not. Like, there's something genuine and sincere about what she's going through and who she becomes that I think there's a lot of appeal there. And I particularly, like, I found her very annoying for the whole movie, the whole show. What do we keep calling it?
I don't know.
It kind of feels like one.
Because we benched it in one sitting.
Yeah, exactly. I particularly liked where at the end she finally is like, oh, it's not all about me anymore. Right? That it was, the very like social justice part of me was like, yeah, you go out there and you sacrifice for the people. Like, that was very appealing to me. And so I'm really curious to see in season 2 where she goes with that. Like, does that last? Does she, I have no idea what would happen there. One of the other things that I think is troubling about the show is that, we have these different types of oppression that are addressed, right? They're brought up. But the main character is also oppressed, right? Is also someone that society looks down on and denigrates and judges and, verbally and physically when they can. And he's a fucking light-eyed white dude. He's a white-haired, blonde white dude. Like, it's a little bit, I understand.
He should be oppressed because of that wig. Any oppression he receives because of that is 100% justified.
Yeah. Well, like, and so I get, I think there's value to these stories about the way that we treat others, and that this whole universe is about that, and a lot, I think we will hopefully get more into the elves. The elves.
Yeah, elves. Yeah.
In the future, in like the next season or whatever, because we didn't get much of that. They're basically like the indigenous people that everything has been stolen from. But like, we've only met 2 Witchers or heard of 2 Witchers, and they're both like white dudes.
Yeah. So very early on, like almost immediately, you get a scene where Geralt walks into a tavern and is encountered with like discrimination, right? And I was immediately like, my guard was up. I'm very, I mean, like, because I know I've been in these circles long enough to know that, like, plenty of white people can watch a white character in a, be it a mutant in, say, the X-Men, films, or in The Witcher or what have you, experience discrimination, oppression, etc., for who they are, and be like, oh man, that's a shame. Like, that really sucks that that he's treated that way. But it doesn't do anything to push their empathy or their awareness beyond, like, it's because the character is white to some degree that they are able to, that they feel that empathy. And it's like, I'm just like, yeah, I mean, we cannot just keep using white people as stand-ins, for playing mutants, as stand-ins for actual real life, like, oppressed people, and expect that to get us anywhere.
Or to resonate.
Yeah.
This show does do one of my favorite, and by favorite I mean it drives me completely around the bend, things that generic fantasy like this often does, which is that somehow, some kind of way, the racial demographics and other identity demographics of this fantasy world just happen to mirror all of the media that we see, in like white society at large. And so this show, although there are a greater number of people of color in lead roles than I expected, nevertheless, the complexion of the show is still very white, with occasional like chocolate drops in the background. And I'm like, where the fuck do these people come from? Like, how do you explain visually in your mind why there are people of different races in this show? And like, race is never addressed in the way that we address it in real life, right? But you have made real world oppression into a metaphor, such that it's, something that can be carried by people who are either visually white or culturally coded as white.
I was thinking about this because I watched a movie the other day that was a very white movie. It was whitey white whites.
Was it a movie that rhymes with Whittle Lemon?
Yep.
Uh-huh.
And there is a scene, a dance scene, and you see what looks like black servants dancing in the scene and as the background. And I was thinking, like, I was thinking about this in terms of like when people of color get cast, because it's always a very deliberate choice, as opposed to when white people get cast, it's just normative. That is it better? This is a total false dichotomy. Is it better that in contemporary shows that are happening today, like The Witcher, that you have races of people just sort of willy-nilly randomly in the world and populating the world so that it looks like a world full of people who aren't all white? Or do you know what I mean? Like,
I'm talking specifically about the numbers. So, if you live in the United States of America today,
sorry about that.
Yeah, and you think like, oh, okay, well, there are like there's 12% Black people in this country and 27% Latinx people or whatever, right?
Are you making up these numbers?
I'm making up these numbers. And I'm saying,
it's like
the point is, like, if you think of yourself as living in a predominantly white space, you will see that mirrored in all sorts of media, even when it's not, necessarily, realistic is a weird word to use. But I'm like, okay, imagine if we're watching The Witcher, and instead of like all of the townspeople being white, except for, one or two, right? What if most of the people are brown? What does that do to your understanding of this fantasy world?
Yeah.
And I think you cannot deny that there are certain genres that are appealing because they are primarily white. And I think often fantasy tries to have it both ways, like visual, in fantasy and visual media. Science fiction does this as well too. So it's like, we're not going to do anything to push that audience away. There will still be mostly white people. But for those people who might be tempted to make an argument about the lack of, diversity on our show, we're going to have one or two. people of color in the background
I've been
as serving wenches, as guards, or whatever. But for the most part, they're not going to be major parts of our show. And so, as I was saying, like, I was so glad that there were people of color who were lead characters in this show. There were greater numbers than I expected. But the rest of the world, I was like, can you just explain to me, like, where do these Black people come from?
Yeah. I was thinking about this
Was it Rivia? What's going on in Rivia?
You should go find out.
I don't want to know nothing about this place.
I'm sure there is loads of fucking lore dump on the internet that you
for
could
real.
read
And
if
you know what?
really wanted to.
I'm determined not to read up about it. I'm just going to wait for season 2 to get here.
I was thinking about this exact issue when I was watching The Haunting of Hill House, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. I don't think I've actually talked about it on the podcast yet, but it is about a white family, and there's 5 children and 2 parents, and they're all white, and it's about them. So their way for them to get around the fact that they're all white people is that, like, all of the extra people, like all of the outside partners and whatever are all people of color. And there's something about that choice that makes me go, oh, well, that this is a show about white people and you can't have it be all white people, but you made the choice that this family's not biracial, for example, or not Black, that it had to be a white family for it to feel the way that the creators wanted to feel. And so I've just been thinking a lot about, like, the ways in which media today is sort of quote unquote required to be quote unquote diverse, and what that ends up looking like. And if it actually is that way, or if it's not, where it's just like, do they get points for adding all of the secondary cast to be people of color?
I think there are a lot of casting folks who, pat themselves on the back because they hired 2 or 3 and they're like, we really did something here, And it's like, if this role, if this means nothing to the production, if it doesn't materially change the way this story is told, you need to figure out why that is and if that's a benefit. Not everything needs to be about a person being of another race, but similarly, if a person in your story, like if you've hired a person of color to portray a character and that person is Black or is Asian or is Latinx, or that should be reflected somehow in, like, the way the story is told in community. It shouldn't just be like, a skin tone change. Am I making any sense? People? Probably not. The medicine's starting to kick in.
There's a whole thing in casting where it's like, well, can we just switch this character to a person of color without actually changing the character to reflect that they are a Latinx person in the world, and what does that mean for them in the world, or what have you? Yeah. But The Witcher. What else about this show?
I hated the Bard so much until, like, the last couple episodes. And then I was like...
Didn't you feel something when Geralt yelled at him and he was like, okay, bye?
Yeah, I did. But I also was like, Geralt's not wrong.
He's not wrong. I also hated him, too.
I did feel for him. But by the end, I was like, you know what? Geralt, he needs this dude.
Good old Cherry.
They need to be riding those mean trails together. This kid is, keeping him on the straight and narrow. Yeah,
there's a way in which is it Yaskir, or I don't know how you say it. And so in the games the character is named Dandelion, but here anyway he has a different name in the show.
Is it also a dude in the games?
Yeah.
Do you think that they didn't call him Dandelion because that seems too fey?
Maybe. I mean, I think, yes, Jaskier is probably more accurate, and let me see what it means. Okay, so it means buttercup. So it's basically the same, very similar name. It's just that we got the games use a translation into English, and the TV show does not. But yeah, there's a way in which he kind of, he's the counterbalance to to all of Geralt's traits, right? Where Geralt is very glum and a man of very few words. The Bard is talkative. He's kind of fun, and he's like that friend who kind of maybe gets on your nerves a little bit, but also you kind of like having them around.
I think that the contrast of them is kind of a problem. I'm going to workshop this right now.
Okay.
This might be dumb. But so there is a societal tendency for like hetero women to be attracted to stoic, silent, gruff, violent men, right? Like the Henry Cavill Geralt character is supposed to be sexually attractive, right? And that like,
oh yeah,
girl, don't act like you were not into that leather dude.
Dude, there's not a universe on earth where I will be attracted to Henry Cavill.
Readers,
anyways,
listeners, she lying.
Let's post all about his rape apology bullshit or whatever garbage he said. Anyways, so what I think happens is that the contrast between the bard and Geralt makes Geralt seem more appealing in this way that it's very troubling, that this type of masculinity I think should be challenged and not made exciting and, blah, 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 whatever it's doing. Stop staring.
Keep workshopping it. I'm sorry.
Ebony's just staring at me.
I'm going to close my eyes so you can keep workshopping it.
But yeah, do you know what I mean? Like, because I was like, the bard is so fucking annoying and will he just go away, even though it's important for narrative tension and all of that stuff. But I think it makes Geralt seem cooler because the bard is so quote unquote uncool because it's not cool to be excited and about things,
Yeah, I mean, The Witcher, the games as well, and certainly the show, I think, are one of the bajillion pieces of media that are a problem in the sense that they romanticize and they normalize and men being like unfeeling, but also violent, or at least capable of violence and capable of domination through violence. It's just it's hegemonic masculinity. It's like just and it reinforces that rather than challenges it. And yes, you're right that rather than being like the bard being like, oh, this contrast that kind of is, oh, here's a different way for men to be. I mean, the show centers Geralt in such a way that he is like the quote unquote the standard, or like the right way and quote unquote to be a man. And Jaskier is like, like you don't really.
Well, and I think that this show like reinforces either the women that are to be appealing to us are either someone like the Queen who fulfills all of those sort of stereotypically masculine traits, right? Where she's totally appealing, but she's a badass and she can fight and she can hold her own and she's in charge and she like talks back and she's kind of funny, right? Like. And not to say we shouldn't find her appealing, but we find her appealing because she's like a dude. There's
a line.
Right? Or you find Yennefer appealing because she's fucking hot, right? Like while there are a lot of women in this world and different ways of being a terrible woman, there's not like, it's still very limiting in terms of the stereotypes that they're kind of being put into.
I agree with you. And I would say that maybe that's why, although I did love the Queen, the characters that I was most interested in was the Nilfgaardian mage and Tissaia. Like those were the two that I just.
You also liked Renfrey.
Yes, and Renfrey,
which I didn't particularly like.
But yeah, I just thought, God, I could watch a whole show on Tissaia and her fucking magic school and the girls getting turned into slugs if they don't graduate, whatever, like I could just watch a lot more about this. And I want to know a lot more about the mage who wound up going to Nilfgaard and what's going on with that Boogle House situation. Like, so yeah, there's absolutely what
but
you're
also
saying here, but I think there's other stuff going on where I'm like, you were also terrible, and I'm interested in your particular flavor of terribleness.
But also, speaking of race, you have the two Black characters, or at least people of color. So you have the woman that works with the witch that works with Nilfgaard, and then you have the dude that has sold his soul to Nilfgaard to be able to do research or whatever, or not Nilfgaard, but
the one who used to be dating Yennefer.
Yeah, and so like. They are all on the other side of what we consider to be the just side.
Yes.
And like that woman, the witch woman.
Well, I really wish I had gone back and looked at these names.
Y'all know what we mean. She's, we're supposed to be against her, right? Like we are actively, so that's kind of a problem because everyone else is, I don't know, maybe I'm.
No, I get what you're saying. I guess just because I guess
Yennefer is not white.
She isn't. I think the actor is actually of Indian heritage.
And also in the lore, she's half elf, which is something, I guess.
Yeah, but what does
we
that
don't know
mean,
yet.
Who
we don't really
the fuck
know.
knows? I just found those characters so compelling. And yes, I'm going to use a term that's gotten way overused recently, but nuanced, that sometimes the villain draws me in more. And yeah, I'm rooting for everybody black, so it doesn't matter what they're doing.
Cool. All right, Carolyn, do you want to sing us out?
Toss a coin to your witcher, O Valley of Plenty, O Valley of Plenty. I'm very sorry, everyone.
Does anyone, do you know any of the other songs? There was a song at the end of every episode, wasn't there?
There's
like a bunch of them. Nobody gave a shit.
That's the song that has taken the internet by storm. And
sure has. It's the Baby Yoda of Witcher songs.
Yes.
All right, y'all. We'll be back with our weekly freakouts.
Hey FFR listeners, did you know that if you join our Patreon community, you can get nifty perks like early access, exclusive weekly bonus segments, access to our friendly Discord, and more? That's right, you can get cool stuff and help us keep doing FFR at the same time. What are you waiting for? Go to patreon.com/femfreak.
What's your freak out?
Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating in this past week. That us and this turned into one word, didn't it?
It's okay. Keep it moving.
Is that how? Yeah, great. Ebony, keep it moving. Do it.
Oh, I'm going first?
Freak out, baby.
Oh, okay. I'm freaking out this week about Knives Out. Just kidding. Although I did just see it.
I did just see it too.
We got to talk about it. We got to make it an upcoming episode. I am freaking out about rewatches I'm doing of Vera and Shetland, both crime procedurals out of the UK, based upon characters and books written by a mystery writer called Anne Cleves. Listen, my relationship to propaganda is complicated. And by
No,
complicated, I mean
you just like it.
I like it, and I buy into it, and it makes it real easy for me to buy into it when there's the distancing factor of geography and awesome accents. So Vera is set in the north of England. Shetland is set in the far, far north of Scotland. And you know what? I'm not even paying attention to what's being said, to the civil liberties that are being abused. I'm not paying attention to the ways that, the cops are infringing upon people's rights. I'm simply listening to these people sound amazing and wear great sweaters. And I'm here to acknowledge that I'm not ever, ever going to give that up.
Like Chris Evans' great sweater and Knives Out.
You know what? After all the talk about his sweaters, I was like, yo, whatever. But I have to say, he was good in that movie.
Did you doubt that he would be good?
Yeah, because the last 7 things I've seen him in have been Marvel movies, right?
Oh, I've seen him in stuff outside of Marvel movies.
But it's, it's Captain America. So
I think
I was expecting that kind of thing. And so to be reminded, oh no, he can actually act.
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Y'all,
Welcome.
if you haven't seen Knives Out yet, please go see it.
All right, Carolyn, what is your freak out?
So this is a freak out that I am questioning the wisdom of using it as my freak out, even as I'm gonna do so, because it's a conflicted freak out. In other words, I'm conflicted about it.
Those are the best.
Yeah. So, we just the Oscar nominations were announced as we record this. They were announced yesterday, and Joker, which I think is a terrible movie, just ideologically, got 11 nominations. It's just, ridiculous number of nominations. So, and yes, it's true. So Oscar's so white, absolutely. But what I'm going to offer today is an alternative, a film that is about a white man.
Carolyn, you're so kicked out of the Feminist Club.
but that I think is much better than Joker. And that was snubbed by the Academy as well. And it almost pains me to say this, but
I'm just like so much build up, Carol. What is it? Tell us.
So there's a film called Uncut Gems, and it stars Adam Sandler, who is a man whose body of work I despise terms of.
I did like Spanglish.
Okay, right. Like, I think he can be very, very good, but I think many of his comedies do perpetuate racism and sexism in very, like, standard, just kind of frat boy, kind of ways, and that they're very disposable. In Uncut Gems is a film by these indie filmmakers named the Safdie brothers, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. And in this film, he plays a man named Howard Ratner, who is a Jewish, New York, jewelry district guy, who is also a just tremendous gambling addict, and just cultivates instability in his own life too. He is tremendously self-destructive. And I've seen people criticize the film by saying things like, well, I don't believe that, I didn't believe that he would make the decisions that he made. I have lived enough of my life around addicts that I found him terrifyingly authentic. And I wanted to run screaming from him because he provoked all these feelings in me of like, I have to get away from this self-destructive and unstable person, because if I'm in their orbit, I'm going to be pulled down with them in their self-destructiveness. I think it's a tremendous performance by Adam Sandler. And the film is just it is not pleasant. It is an anxiety-inducing film, but I think that that's good. Like, I think that a film about this type of character should not be like, oh, that was entertaining. Like, I was glad that I found it kind of provocative and kind of like off-putting in a way. It has a really, I think, stunning synth-heavy soundtrack, and it has these like concerns with the mystical and the cosmic, even as it's about this guy who is just obsessed with placing huge bets on basketball games. Kevin Garnett plays himself in a very good like supporting role, and who? Speaking of Knives Out, somebody who's quickly becoming somebody that I'm always happy to see in things. Lakeith Stanfield has a supporting role in this, and I'm just like I don't know. There's just something about him where I'm just like always like I just like seeing him on screen. And he, this is very much Adam Sandler's movie. Like all the other characters revolve around him. He is absolutely at its center. It's if you're going to watch a movie about a really troubled white guy, consider Uncut Gems as an alternative to films like Joker.
If you absolutely have to watch a movie about a white guy.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I kind of want to see that now, to be honest, weirdly. All right. My freak out is about Euphoria, an HBO show that I finally caught up on during the holidays, which feel like 5,000 years ago. So
that was a hard holiday watch.
Dude, it's brutal.
Yeah.
It's very hard to watch. It is, so like every 10 years or so, you'll get a very serious drama about teenagers that's very serious and real about like teenager life. And that's what this is. It stars Zendaya, who is, dude, she's amazing. Like, she's just absolutely incredible. And she is a 17-year-old teenager who has been addicted to drugs for a long time, overdosed, was put into rehab, got out of rehab, does not want to be sober. And, that is the main character. She becomes friends with this other character, Jules, who is a trans woman, and it's also played by a trans woman. Jules is played by a trans woman named Hunter Schafer. And she actually is interesting because she and her father were very prominent in and vocal in protesting the really aggressive, oppressive bathroom laws that were trying to be passed in North Carolina. And then through that, became a model and an actor and is just amazing on this show. So the two of them together really just, it's so good. Now, the other thing is that, the show is obviously about, sex and drugs and, teenage things in this incredibly intense way. There's also a character that is the white dude jock that everybody loves, and the way that they talk about his privilege, the way they talk about his fears around homophobia, the manipulation, his family and where that comes out of, it's so honest and true that it's really tough to watch. This is not a show where you're going to get a happy ending. This is a show that's going to be no, this is what actually would happen, and this is the harm that would come out of this. So, it's utterly brilliant. It is gut-wrenching and brutal, and I can't recommend it enough.
I want to give a shout out to HBO, which is a weird thing to give a shout out about, but they are now requiring that their productions have intimacy coordinators, which is way, way past due. But I just want to, they're one of the, I think they might be the only production company that is doing that right now, or doing that within their production company.
And a show like this definitely needs that,
right?
For sure.
Exactly. And an intimacy coordinator is not just about, helping to map out sex scenes. Anything that is, potentially emotionally charged or sensitive, it is vital that you have someone in that role on your production. They also have an amazing trans consultant on the show, Scott Turner Schofield, who I've had the privilege to talk to before. So yeah, Euphoria, they went into this knowing that this was going to be hard and they needed to do it right. And so just shout out to HBO for not half-assing it, I guess.
And they did, man. Woo. All right, well, you can submit your own freakout at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. Thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Stay tuned for the freaking after party, only available to backers of this podcast, which you can be or learn more about at patreon.com/femfreak. You can find us everywhere great podcasts are found, and if you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review us. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and all the social medias at FemFreak. This show is engineered by Rob Pera. Carrie Stimpson provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Join us next week for another feminist dive into pop culture. Bye.
Bye.
Later.